My name is Lena Hardin. I served 12 years in the United States Navy, some of them in places so dark, even the stars wouldn't show. But none of it prepared me for the moment my own father, standing in a crowd of investors, looked at me and said, "She's a failed investment." That day wasn't a battlefield, but it cut deeper than shrapnel. I had stood in enemy territory with a rifle in my hands, but at my sister's graduation, I stood alone, dressed in black, holding a glass of water like it was a shield. That was the day a Navy helicopter landed on a pristine college lawn, and everything changed. Before we begin, I need to ask, where are you watching from, and how old are you? Please hit subscribe to Subtle Revenge Stories, if you believe some truths deserve to be told out loud. They say the deepest wounds are the ones that come from family. That day on the lawn at Georgetown, mine cut to the bone. I wasn't surprised, not really. I knew who my father was. I'd spent my whole life trying not to become him. But even I didn't expect him to look a U.S. senator in the eye, raise a champagne flute, and say with a smile, "Chloe is the family's blue chip stock." Dana. After 12 years in the Navy, she's a failed investment. The words weren't just cruel, they were calculated. He wanted me small, invisible. A reminder to his wealthy circle of what happens when a hardened daughter strays from the plan. I stood there in my pressed black trousers and simple blouse, every inch of me plain against the sea of Tom Ford and Chanel. My shoes were scuffed from months in desert sand. My hands were steady, but my jaw clenched until it ached. The air was thick with laughter, thin, forced, the kind you hear in rooms full of power, where truth is unwelcome. I focused on the glass in my hand. Perrier. No bubbles left. Just water and weight. My mother passed me by like I was a stain she hoped no one would notice. "For God's sake, Lena," she hissed under her breath. "I sent you a check. You couldn't buy a simple J. Crew dress." She didn't stop. She didn't meet my eyes. Just kept walking toward her real daughter, the one she could show off. I stood under the oak tree, the only patch of shade in that glittering garden of privilege. My breathing slowed. Inhale. Exhale. Bud's training had taught me how to calm myself under fire, how to center in the middle of chaos. Funny how it didn't quite work when the bullets were words, and they were coming from the people who were supposed to love you. Chloe stood beaming in her cap and gown, drenched in praise. My father clapped her shoulder like he'd just closed a $1 million deal. The contrast between us wasn't lost on anyone. He knew exactly what he was doing, positioning her as the family success and me as the cautionary tale. And yet I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't shrink. I stared straight ahead at the spire of Healy Hall in the distance, fixed my gaze like a sniper locking in. I reminded myself who I was, not what they said I was. I had worn the trident. I had led men through hell. I had walked through fire and come out breathing. And yet somehow, standing on that lawn surrounded by pearls and legacy, I felt more invisible than I ever did in war paint. Tell me something, have you ever stood among your own blood and felt like a ghost? Have you ever been made to feel like a mistake, simply because you chose a path they couldn't control? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story too. It started as a whisper in the wind, soft, almost unnoticeable. A faint vibration beneath the polished soles of those $900 shoes. A murmur through champagne flutes and practiced smiles. At first, I thought it was in my head. Maybe a memory from deployment leaking through the cracks. But then the sound grew deep and guttural, a rhythmic thrum that began to shake the ground. People paused, mid-sentence, heads tilting, brows furrowed. The string quartet screeched to a halt. Silence fell over the immaculate lawn like a dropped curtain. Then the sky broke open. An MH-60S Seahawk helicopter came slicing through the blue like a blade through silk. Steel gray, brutal, efficient. It was a bird of war forged not for elegance but for extraction and command. It didn't belong at Georgetown. And yet there it was descending with deadly precision onto the manicured lawn. The force of its rotors sent napkins flying, hats tumbling, and champagne splashing onto linen dresses. I watched as a senator's wife screamed and ducked, clutching her pearls. A man near me cursed as his toupee sailed through the air like a surrender flag. In another life, I might have laughed. The chopper touched down in the center of the garden like it owned the place. Its side door slid open with mechanical authority. 3 soldiers jumped out, tactical gear M4s held low movements, crisp and clean. The entire event was instantly transformed. The string lights and white tents suddenly looked like targets in a training exercise. Guests scrambled cell phones out, capturing the moment they'd never forget. But I didn't move. I just stood there, frozen beneath the oak tree. Then I saw him. Captain Mark Dalton emerged from the chopper, his boots pounding across the grass with purpose. His uniform was immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He walked straight toward me, ignoring the crowd, ignoring the chaos. And when he reached me in front of everyone, including my father, who now looked like someone had drained the blood from his body, Dalton saluted. Sharp, clean, respectful. "Commander Hardin," he said, voice strong and sure. "We need you." I heard my father's voice stammer behind me. "See, Commander." The word hit him like a slap. He had never used my rank before. Not once. Not in private. Certainly not in front of his investor friends. Dalton's gaze didn't break. "Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin, Naval Special Warfare Command. Your presence is required immediately." He handed a sealed envelope to the university's dean, then leaned in, voice low and urgent. "Morch Holdings. Your name is on a contract we never received. This is big, Lena. Real big." I nodded once. No hesitation, no fear. Just the steel I'd built up over a decade of war. I turned away from the crowd, from my family's stunned faces, and walked toward the chopper. The same way I'd walked into every battlefield, calm, focused, ready. Have you ever had a moment where the world stopped and saw you for who you really are, not who they pretended you were? If so, I want to hear it. Share your story in the comments. The sound of the rotors faded as the Seahawk lifted us above the Potomac, slicing through the sky like a blade through water. I didn't look back at the Georgetown lawn. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd left behind: my father's pale face, my mother's frozen smile, Chloe's perfect world rocked off its axis. But that wasn't my battlefield anymore. I belonged in the hum of engines, the scent of oil and steel, the quiet calculation of risk. I sat across from Dalton, helmet resting on my knees, eyes locked on his. I'd known Mark since Djibouti. He wasn't prone to panic. So the fact that his jaw was tight and his knuckles white around the strap told me everything I needed. "We pulled a contract," he said over the headset, voice tight. "Morch Holdings, defense supplier. On paper, it looks clean. But procurement flagged it missing inventory. Irregular routing payment, authorization flagged as classified. And the signature on the receiving documents, he handed me a tablet. My name glared back in bold print, Lieutenant CMDR Lena Hardin. "I never signed this," I said flatly. "I know," he replied, "which is why you're here." I studied the document. It was perfect. Too perfect. A scan of a signature I barely remembered from a training clearance form 3 years ago. A ghost of my own handwriting weaponized against me. I'd spent over a decade guarding my reputation like my sidearm. It was all I had. And now someone with access and motive had weaponized my identity to defraud the government. "We think your name was used to legitimize a transaction that never went through," Dalton continued. A $2 million order for field tech thermal scopes, encrypted comms, satellite pings. All of it disappeared. No delivery, no trace. But the money, gone. I tightened the chin strap of my helmet. Who greenlit the transfer? Dalton didn't answer right away. He tapped the screen, pulled up metadata, then a timestamp. March 15, 2021. You were off-grid. Black site in Djibouti. You don't exist in digital form during that period. I felt a cold knot twist in my gut. That date wasn't just familiar. It was the week we lost Petty Officer Graves in a night ambush. I remembered the dust, the static in the comms, the weight of his body as we carried him out. I'd been completely cut off from the world, focused only on survival. And while I was dodging bullets, someone back home had been forging my name for profit. "Someone counted on your silence," Dalton said. "Your absence made this possible." I looked at him, voice steady. "Then I'm done being absent." He nodded once. "We'll set up in the skiff when we land. Full access. You'll have everything we've got." The aircraft banked hard toward the Washington Navy Yard. Below, the monuments of D.C. glittered with quiet indifference. I stared down at the city that shaped my family and realized this wasn't just a mission. This was personal. If someone took your name, your honor, and turned it into a tool for greed, what would you do? Would you let it go? Or would you fight to take it back? As the Seahawk descended toward the Navy Yard, my body remained still. But my mind, it slipped. It happens sometimes when you've lived through too much. You hold yourself together until the quiet moments, and then your brain drags you back not to a war zone, but somewhere worse. Home. I could still see that Christmas Eve in Bethesda. The house was lit up like a magazine spread. My mother insisted on perfection gold ribbon, fresh pine imported glass ornaments. Chloe squealed when she unwrapped a brand new BMW key fob, the same metallic blue model she had circled in the Neiman Marcus catalog. My father beamed like he'd just married her off to a hedge fund. "An investment in your future at Georgetown, sweetheart," he'd said. Then it was my turn. I was 18. I had just been accepted to the Naval Academy. My hands trembled as I held the letter, thinking maybe this time, maybe he'll see me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cream envelope. Inside was a check for $500. For something a little more feminine, my mother had said with a polite smile. "They'll teach you how to march, but don't forget how to walk in heels." Their words weren't loud, but they were sharp. And they stuck. That was the moment I realized love in our home came with terms and conditions. Chloe's path, polished, predictable, was applauded. Mine was tolerated at best, mocked at worst. I shoved those memories aside as the helicopter settled. The familiar weight of gear and gunmetal snapped me back into focus. We were on the ground, and I had a job to do. But the ache lingered not just in the past, but in every part of the present. It wasn't just about money or fraud. It was about what had been taken from me long before anyone touched my signature. It was about dignity, the quiet erasure of who I was, because I didn't fit into the image they had painted of what a hardened should be. They called it love, but it felt more like branding. I followed Dalton through the narrow hallways of the Navy Yard. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of stale coffee and old files filled the air. We entered the skiff, a windowless classified operations room, designed to keep secrets in and everything else out. I sat down, back straight, eyes clear. This was where I belonged. Not under chandeliers or beside grand pianos. Here, among data, evidence, fact. Dalton handed me a file and said, "Before we dive in, you should know something. This wasn't sloppy. Whoever did this knew you'd be out of reach. Knew your silence would protect them. But silence is a funny thing. It can protect, or it can rot. Have you ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace when every fiber of your being knew that silence was betrayal? Did you keep quiet? Or did you finally speak?" The door to the skiff sealed behind us with a hiss, muffling the world outside. It was like stepping into another dimension, sterile, silent, without pretense. No crystal chandeliers, no curated smiles, no expectations to be someone I wasn't. Just terminals, secured servers, and the kind of truth that didn't care about your last name. I slid into the chair across from Dalton. My fingers moved fast, already keyed into the system. 12 years of intelligence work had taught me how to navigate a digital battlefield. But this time, the enemy wasn't insurgents or pirates. It was blood. It was legacy. We started with bank records, dates, timestamps, locations. I matched every fraudulent transaction against my deployment logs. And just like Dalton warned, it wasn't sloppy. It was surgical. The man behind it knew exactly when I'd be off-grid. He had planned for my silence. And he was right. I had been silent. For years. Silent when my father called my service a phase. Silent when my mother introduced me at Gallus as someone who works for the government. Silent when Chloe laughed about how I never grew out of playing G.I. Jane. I let them define me in their polished little world, even as I bled for one they would never understand. But not anymore. Dalton's voice brought me back. I found a flag. A credit line opened in Richmond. March 15, 2021. 2 million. Authorized under your name. I didn't even blink. Pull the digital application metadata. I want IP addresses, upload sources, authentication logs. Everything. He worked in silence. Within minutes, he had it. The IP address pointed to a location in Bethesda. I didn't need a map. I already knew. Bradley Manor, my childhood home, the same house where I was told to keep my elbows off the dining table and my ambition tucked inside a dress. My name was forged in the same study where my father once told me, "You're damaging the family brand." I stood up from my chair, not out of shock, not out of anger, but out of clarity. 12 years I spent earning that name, I said, my voice calm. 12 years of service, of blood, sand, and steel. And he took it. He used it to steal, to lie, to prop up the very empire that saw me as its shame. Dalton looked up. So what do we do next? I met his gaze. The weight of years behind me and the fire of justice rising. We don't negotiate. We don't send warnings. We build a case. And when it's ready, we take it to court. Public, loud, unforgiving. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not just a daughter, not just an operator, but a woman reclaiming her name on her terms. Tell me, have you ever reached that breaking point where silence turns into resolve? That moment when you stop apologizing and finally say, enough. I want to know what that moment looked like for you. There's a kind of silence that exists only inside a skiff, airtight, clinical, and cold. No outside signal can penetrate, no idle noise can sneak through. But that night, the silence felt different. It wasn't just operational. It was personal. The hum of servers was the only sound between us as Dalton pulled up encrypted communication logs and procurement databases. I sat with my arms crossed, my breath steady, my thoughts sharp. I wasn't just searching for anomalies, I was hunting betrayal. Dalton's fingers flew across the keyboard. All right, we've got something. He turned his screen toward me. A digital signature authorization form filed through a defense contractor we've dealt with before, Morch Holdings. It's clean on the surface, but the signature is yours, and the timing is impossible. I leaned forward. The timestamp on the document was exact March 15, 2021, 8:03:14 EST. That morning I was halfway across the globe, preparing to go dark for a high-risk insertion in the Gulf of Aden. There wasn't just no internet access. There wasn't even oxygen beyond our sealed masks for most of that op. I didn't exist to the world that week, and that had been intentional. That was the week we lost Graves, I said quietly. We were off-grid for 7 days. Dalton nodded. Which means whoever filed this knew you'd be unreachable. Knew you couldn't countersign or deny it in real time. It was precise. They even used your Navy email address as backup contact to make it appear official. I studied the page. The signature looked like mine, but the alignment was too symmetrical. I recognized the mistake. It was lifted from a scanned DD-93 I'd filed during a readiness drill 3 years prior, probably stored somewhere in a cloud archive my father had legal access to through me. My stomach clenched. I spoke low, calm. This was never a mistake. This was orchestrated. Dalton hesitated. You think your father's behind it? I looked at him. You saw the IP location. You know what house that is. Still, it's hard to imagine a man like Richard Harden pulling something this personal. I almost laughed. You don't know Richard Harden. He doesn't pull triggers himself. He hires hands, shifts blame, builds distance, but he always signs the check. Dalton turned to another screen. Want me to trace back other financial transactions under your credentials? Anything that smells like fraud. Do it, I said. Start with contract authorizations, then look for consulting fees. Shell companies, anything registered within the last 5 years. I want every inch of shadow pulled into the light. As he worked, I stared at the screen at my own name used like a stolen passport. I'd always thought identity theft was a crime for strangers and hackers. I never imagined it would come from the man who once taught me how to ride a bike. Has someone ever used your trust, not just broken it, but turned it into a weapon? How did you respond when the enemy didn't come from outside, but from your own home? It was Dalton who found it. He wasn't even looking for it directly. He had been scanning archived communications flagged by our search terms financial authorization attorney. Most of it was noise system notices, auto replies, travel approvals. Then one message popped up buried deep in a cluster of emails from 2 years prior. The subject line read, "Helping Lena." The sender was my mother. Dalton read it first, his brows knitting slowly into a frown. You're going to want to see this, he said, voice lower than usual. He tapped a key and the message filled the screen. Richard Darling. Here is that power of attorney form Lena left before her trip. She said she'd be completely off the grid for months, you know how she is. Could you look this over for her? She trusts you so much. Love, L. I stared at the words. My breath didn't hitch, my pulse didn't spike. That was the danger of trauma, you get used to it. But my chest felt heavy, like someone had slipped a stone under my ribs. Attached at the bottom was a file, Power of Attorney, jarlena.pdf. I didn't remember leaving any form. I certainly never emailed it to either of them. Dalton clicked open the attachment. It was exactly what it claimed to be, a durable power of attorney signed with my name at the bottom. Perfect cursive. Identical to the signature on my enlistment form. Too identical. He zoomed in. That's a lift. A digital cut and paste. It's seamless but not undetectable. I didn't speak. I just kept staring at that one sentence in her message. She trusts you so much. That was the knife. Because she was right. I did. After everything, after years of being the afterthought at family dinners, after Christmases spent overseas, while they posted portraits in front of the hearth without me, I still trusted her. I never thought she'd hand over a loaded weapon. Maybe she didn't realize what she was doing. Maybe she thought she was helping. Or maybe just maybe she knew exactly what she was enabling and chose not to ask questions. I cleared my throat. What was the IP address that uploaded the credit app using this document? Dalton entered the trace command. A map of the DC metro area appeared. A single red pin blinked over Bradley Manor, my parents' home. My childhood bedroom, now a guest suite. The old piano I was never allowed to play. The hallway where I memorized the sound of doors closing behind me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't carelessness. This was precision. I looked at Dalton, my voice cold and steady. My mother didn't just hand him the pen. She uncapped it and pointed him to the line. The betrayal wasn't dramatic or loud. It was polite, intentional, and devastating. Have you ever been betrayed not by what someone did, but by what they allowed to happen? The kind of silence that's louder than a scream. Tell me how you recognized it, and what you did when you finally did. Angela Ruiz didn't flinch when I walked into her office and dropped the printed power of attorney onto her desk. She simply adjusted her reading glasses, scanned the page, and gave a small, knowing exhale through her nose. Clean lift, she murmured. But let's see who they think they're dealing with. She opened the file on her monitor, uploaded the PDF, and pulled up the metadata. The quiet in that room wasn't awkward, it was surgical. She clicked through layers of digital fingerprints with the ease of someone who'd once shredded egos in a courtroom the way operators breach a door. Bingo, she said, tapping the screen. This file wasn't created on a government system. Not even close. It was built using, get this, a version of FinCraft Pro. That's proprietary software used by certain defense contractors for, let's call it, creative accounting. She turned to look at me. It's also blacklisted from all Department of Defense networks. We're talking felony-level mishandling just by using it in conjunction with a military identity. The irony stung. My father had used the very credentials he mocked to access systems he would never have touched on his own. He weaponized my clearance, my oath to commit a crime that could bring down entire firms. And he didn't even bother to cover his tracks completely. Angela leaned back, fingers steepled. Here's the real kicker. That software leaves a unique signature like a watermark. It's embedded in every document it creates. I can trace the license back to the contractor who provided it. If it matches one of your father's investment partners or subsidiary accounts, that's a direct line. We don't just have forgery, we have conspiracy. I stared at the screen at the tiny line of code blinking near the document ID. It was like staring at a drop of blood on white tile, so small but impossible to ignore. He used my life, I said quietly. My deployments. My absence. He turned my silence into his strategy. Angela's tone hardened. That was never silence, Commander. That was duty. You upheld yours. He violated his. I nodded once steady. So what's our next move? Her lips curled into the beginnings of a wartime smile. Now we go hunting. We subpoena the software vendor. We request usage logs. We pull their licensing records. And if that document was edited under an account tied to your father's company or one of his shell holdings, he's toast. She clicked to save the evidence into our secured database. I'll file with the district court for preliminary fraud action. This isn't a family dispute anymore. It's federal. I sat there absorbing it all, and for the first time since this began, I felt the smallest flicker of something close to power, not the kind that came from rank or reputation, but the kind that came from standing up, eyes open, spine straight, ready to fight back. Have you ever taken the first real step toward justice, even knowing it would cost you more than comfort? Tell me what that moment looked like for you. And what gave you the courage to take it? The message came through while I was on the phone with Angela reviewing preliminary filings. My personal phone lit up on the granite countertop, an unfamiliar warmth pulsing from a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at the screen like it might detonate. Angela caught the change in my face. Do you want me to stay on? She asked. I shook my head slowly. No. This one I take alone. I tapped accept and brought the phone to my ear. Lena, darling. My mother's voice slid through the line like honey over glass. Polished. Too sweet. Too rehearsed. We heard you're back in D.C. Why haven't you called your father? And I have been so worried. Worried, I nearly laughed out loud. But I swallowed the bitterness and kept my tone even. Worried about what, Mom? My well-being or Dad's investment portfolio? There was a pause, brief but telling. I could almost hear her shifting in her chair, recalibrating the performance. When she spoke again, her voice carried a tremor, the practiced ache of a woman feigning heartbreak. Lena, please. Don't be like this. We're family. Yes, there have been misunderstandings, but your father? He only wanted to protect you. Protect me. Like a spider protects the fly. Have lunch with me? She continued, her voice now nearly pleading. Just you and me. The Capitol Grill. I'll get our usual booth. We can talk. Please, Lena. The Capitol Grill. His turf. His stage. I should have said no. Every tactical instinct screamed it. But somewhere buried under all the hurt and steel there was still a small voice. a child's voice hoping for something different. I agreed. She was already seated when I arrived the next afternoon. Same flawless suit, same perfectly curled hair, same glass of Chardonnay, held like a prop. The hostess greeted me by name, a subtle reminder that the Hardin name still carried weight in this town. She didn't hug me, just air-kissed the space beside my cheek. For the first 30 minutes, she didn't mention the investigation. Instead, she talked about Chloe's job offers, charity season golf at the club, and how the city just wasn't the same since the mayor's scandal. It was textbook. Soften the target. Distract. Disarm. I listened. I didn't smile. Then, as the waiter cleared our untouched salads, she leaned forward and placed her manicured hand over mine. Her perfume was Chanel No. 5. Her grip was marble cold. "Lena," she said softly, tears welling on cue. "Your father made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But if you pursue this, if you go public, you'll destroy everything. You'll ruin Chloe's future. Do you really want to do that to your sister?" There it was, the real ask, not an apology, not accountability, just emotional blackmail in high heels. I pulled my hand back firm but composed. "Are you asking me to protect a criminal mom?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm asking you to be a daughter." And in that moment, I realized she wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the empire that was about to burn. Have you ever been guilted into silence by someone who claimed it was love? Did you comply, or did you finally say no? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I simply reached into my wallet, pulled out 2 crisp $50 bills, and laid them flat on the linen tablecloth, more than enough to cover a Caesar salad and an iced tea I hadn't touched. My mother blinked, confused, for half a second before her mask cracked just slightly. I looked her in the eyes, not with anger, not with defiance, but with something far more dangerous to her world: indifference. "I've already paid my debt to this family, Mom," I said calmly. "I paid it with my youth, with scars you've never seen, with years of silence you mistook for compliance. I nearly paid with my life more than once for a country that values truth more than appearances. That account is settled." She opened her mouth, probably to say something rehearsed, maybe another plea, maybe a final dig, but I stood before she could speak. The entire restaurant seemed to hush around us. I didn't care. I adjusted my jacket, my movements deliberate and sharp, and added, "I owe him only one thing now." She stared at me, eyes wide, her hand still frozen on the table where mine had been moments earlier. A fair trial, I finished. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for the last word. Some battles are won not with noise, but with absence, the silence left behind when you finally choose yourself. The sun outside was too bright, too clean, almost mocking in contrast to the rot I'd left behind at that table. But I felt no shame, only resolve. That night, back at my temporary apartment, I sat alone with a single light on the case files spread out like blueprints across the kitchen island. Angela's voice came through my phone speaker as we finalized timelines and filed motions. There was no hesitation in my tone now, no room for second guessing. "I want it all on record," I said. "We're not settling. We're not negotiating. We're going to trial. I want every transaction, every forged signature, every false form exposed. And I want his name tied to mine only through the verdict." Angela's voice was calm. "This will get ugly. You know that. I do. He'll go after your reputation. He already started. I know." Then why now? Why escalate? I looked down at the pages beneath my hand, my name, my record, my legacy, and answered without pause. Because I'm done letting people like him use love as a weapon. I'm done being told that silence is loyalty. If he wanted my loyalty, he should have earned my trust. And there it was. Not rage, not vengeance, just clarity. Have you ever stood at the edge of your own history and decided once and for all to rewrite it? What gave you the strength to stop surviving and start taking back what was yours? The counterstrike came faster than I expected. Less than 36 hours after the confrontation at the Capitol Grill, I woke to a single text message from Dalton. It wasn't a paragraph. It wasn't even a sentence. Just a link. I tapped it with a still sleeping thumb. The page loaded, and my blood turned to ice. Politico Playbook, Morning Edition. A rift in a DC power family. The subheading read like it had been dipped in venom. Sources whisper of a decorated but unstable Navy officer pushing baseless accusations against her father, a respected figure in the financial sector. They didn't need to say my name. Anyone in this town with half a memory could connect the dots. The implication was clear. I was unhinged. A ticking time bomb dressed in a uniform. A disgrace to the family name. There were no accusations of financial fraud. No mention of stolen identity or forged contracts. Just vague allusions to psychological strain after years of deployment and deep family trauma unresolved since adolescence. It was a masterpiece of quiet character assassination crafted by professionals, distributed with surgical precision, and designed to do exactly one thing: isolate me. Dalton called seconds later. They're going for the mental instability angle. Classic move. If they can frame you as damaged, nothing you say will stick. I clenched my jaw. Let them. I've survived worse than slander. But the damage was already rippling. 3 hours later, the real blow landed not from a reporter, but from family. There was a frantic pounding on my apartment door. I opened it to find Chloe. Her hair was undone, her eyes puffy and wild. She was clutching a printed copy of the article like it was a subpoena. "What did you do, Lena?" she cried, voice cracking. "You're destroying this family. Dad said you were struggling, that he was trying to protect you, and now this. Now you're dragging all of us into some paranoid fantasy." She sounded like Mom. She sounded like someone repeating lines fed to her by someone who had everything to lose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explode. I just looked at her. Really looked at her. The girl with the BMW. The job offers. The pearl-studded path paved by lies she never had to question. "Help me," I said quietly. "You think he's helping me by stealing my name? By opening accounts and laundering money while I was off fighting for a country he barely respects?" She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She took a step back, the realization slowly beginning to form in her eyes. Not full understanding, just the crack in the shell. "You think I want to be doing this?" I added. "You think I wanted war with the only family I have left?" "No. But I'm not going to be erased, Chloe. Not even by him." She turned without another word, her heels echoing in the hallway as she disappeared. And just like that, I knew the real war had begun. Have you ever had to stand alone in your truth, even when everyone you loved was standing on the other side? How did you find the strength to stay rooted when the world tried to shake you loose? If they were going to weaponize my past, I was going to turn it into a shield. I booked the next flight to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. No lawyers, no press, just me and the records. There was something grounding about stepping onto that base again. The tang of ocean air, the distant thud of boots hitting pavement, the muffled cadence of voices calling out drills. I wasn't there to be nostalgic. I was there to retrieve a decade of my life, documented, time-stamped, irrefutable. Dalton met me at the administration building. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. He handed me a clipboard. "You'll need to sign for classified access to your deployment records and fit reps. Everything from Djibouti to the French Alps." I scrawled my signature without hesitation. The chief petty officer on duty glanced at my name, then at my face, his brow twitching with faint recognition. "Welcome home, Commander," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. We were escorted to a temperature-controlled archive room lined with steel cabinets and digital terminals. Under the cold hum of fluorescent lights, Dalton and I spread out the files like evidence in a war room. Black and white orders, deployment logs, fitness reports, intel briefings. Every operation, every blackout period, every location documented with military precision. Dalton tapped a page. March 15, 2021 credit line opened in Richmond. According to this, he pointed at my fit rep. You are leading a classified insertion in the Gulf of Aden. Mission notes confirm radio blackout for 72 hours. I nodded. That alone proves I couldn't have authorized any financial transaction. I didn't exist in the civilian world that week. He moved to another page. September 10th, 2022 brokerage account opened under your name in Delaware. Meanwhile, you were training with GIGN in the French Alps. Joint operation, NATO classified. One by one, every transaction tied to my name was pinned against military evidence that placed me in a completely different time zone, often without communications or external access. Each lie my father had crafted began to crumble under the weight of government documentation. There was something deeply satisfying, almost surgical, about watching it all line up. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't emotion. This was proof. Cold, clean, inarguable. As I packed the files back into the satchel, I paused over a faded photo clipped to one of the reports my SEAL team gear on sweat-drenched, half-smiling in the desert sun. I ran a finger over it. These men had trusted me with their lives. And back home, my own father couldn't be trusted with my name. Dalton looked over. You all right? I met his eyes. I'm done defending myself with words. We have the records now. Let's make them hear the truth. Have you ever had to fight lies with facts, knowing full well the truth alone might not be enough to win? How did you stay grounded when the evidence was on your side, but the world refused to listen? Angela called as I stepped out of the records vault, her voice razor-sharp with something between disbelief and rage. Lena, I just found something. Another corporate account registered under your name, but it's not just fraud, it's fabrication. I walked to the edge of the pier behind the main admin building, eyes fixed on the ocean. How bad? Meridian Impact LLC, she said. Filed in Delaware? Surprise, surprise. Set up to receive small consulting payments through a shell fund that traces back to a Mork Holdings subsidiary. The kicker. The account holder is listed as you. But to open that account, they needed a second form of ID. I already knew what was coming before she said it. A Georgia driver's license, she finished. Digital copy uploaded 6 months ago. My breath hitched not in fear but in disgust. I've never had a Georgia license. I've never even lived there. Angela was already ahead of me. We traced the upload to your father's office building. K Street. Same internal IP as the original credit line submission. He didn't just forge your signature this time, Lena. He created a whole alternate version of you. A ghost he could control. I closed my eyes for a beat, the wind brushing across my face. A fake license. A shell company. A full-blown identity replica. All built off the back of the woman he tried to erase. And he didn't care if I lived or died just as long as I stayed silent. He needed a persona that looked just real enough, Angela continued, but distant enough to keep you unaware. And he gambled that you'd never find out because you were always too far away, too busy, too committed to honor over self-preservation. She was right. I gripped the railing tighter. My father had turned every strength I carried, my duty, my absence, my silence, into vulnerabilities. He bet I'd stay buried under code and clearance, trusting the system while he quietly profited off the identity I'd bled for. But the system had limits. And I had finally reached mine. Get me everything, I said quietly. I want scanned images of the license IP log files, filing timestamps, registered agents, every thread. I'll pull it in front of the board myself if I have to. Angela's voice lowered. Lena. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is layered, sustained, and deliberate. If we push, this doesn't end in court. It ends in indictment. Good, I replied without hesitation. Because I'm done pulling punches. I ended the call and stared out at the horizon where the ocean met the sky, one blue crashing into another. A line blurred for most, but not for me. I'd learned how to navigate darkness, how to walk with ghosts, and now I was facing one of my own creation, not by choice, but by force. Have you ever discovered someone built an entire narrative around your name, without your consent, without your knowledge? If so, how did you take back your voice when they tried to speak for you? It was Dalton who remembered the final thread. We were in the conference room at Coronado, surrounded by deployment logs and authentication files, when he looked up from his laptop with a flicker of something like recognition. Years ago, he said slowly, there was an issue with your life insurance policy. A hiccup in the beneficiary form while you were on deployment. I had to contact your emergency contact, your father. I looked at him. Calls like that? They're recorded right for verification. He nodded. Especially when they involve sensitive personnel data. They're archived through the Navy's internal review system. We can request it, but it'll have to go through official channels. Do it, I said. Now. Hours later, a secured audio file landed in my inbox, authorized by the NCIS. The room went still as we hit play. There was a low beep, followed by Dalton's younger voice, clear, polite, procedural. I need to confirm some information with Lieutenant Commander Hardin's legal power of attorney, he said. Then came the voice I hadn't heard directly in months, but had lived under like a shadow for most of my life. This is Richard Hardin, my father said, smooth and assured, like he was introducing himself at a gala. I'm her power of attorney. You can speak with me. Click. That was it. Just a sentence. But it landed like a gavel. There was no doubt, no confusion, just a man calm and confident claiming a title that had never been rightfully his. Dalton sat back, arms folded. That's all we need. I stared at the screen. I expected to feel rage. I expected something hot, acidic, explosive. But what settled in my chest was colder. He had lied so easily. Not a pause, not a stammer, just entitlement spoken with elegance. He had worn the mask of fatherhood so well I almost believed it myself for years. I stood and walked to the window, needing air, even if only behind glass. The sun was setting beyond the coastline, casting long shadows over the water. I thought of everything I had missed over the years. Birthdays, weddings, holidays. I had chosen sacrifice, honor, duty. And while I had been standing between enemies and my country, he had been signing my name, building false walls in my image, cashing in on silence he assumed I'd never break. But he forgot one thing. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the inhale before the strike. I turned to Dalton. We've got it all. The fraud, the forgery, the audio. He doesn't just lose this case. He loses everything. Dalton gave a single nod. Then let's load the magazines. And just like that, the war left the shadows. It was no longer about whispers or suggestions. It was about hard proof, signed, stamped, and admissible. Have you ever caught someone in the act not by chance but by deliberate effort? How did it feel to hold undeniable truth in your hands? And what did you choose to do with it? The hearing room at the Federal Civilian Review Board was built to intimidate. Mahogany walls, gray carpet, a bench raised just high enough to remind you who held the gavel. 3 adjudicators sat behind it, expressionless, deliberate. Lawyers whispered in corners. Reporters lingered outside. But I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to deliver facts with precision, like I'd done 100 times on the battlefield. My father sat at the respondents' table, flanked by a team of corporate attorneys dressed like they'd stepped out of a high-gloss financial magazine. He looked unbothered, hands folded, suit immaculate, his usual air of detachment carefully intact. He glanced at me only once, as if he expected to see his daughter still trapped under the weight of old doubts. but the woman standing across from him wasn't the same girl he used to control with a single sigh. I wasn't in a civilian blazer. I wore my Navy service dress blues, my ribbons and medals neatly aligned, the trident pin just above my heart. My posture was regulation straight, but my presence was personal. I wasn't there to argue feelings. I was there to report a crime. Angela stood at my side, calm, and composed, her tone crisp as she opened the case. "Good morning, members of the board," she began. "My client, Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin, appears today not to air a personal grievance, but to present evidence of federal offenses conducted through the unauthorized use of her military identity." As she spoke, a world map filled the screen behind us, digital pins dropped at locations tied to the fraudulent transactions. One by one, she called out the inconsistencies. On March 15, 2021, a $2 million line of credit was opened in Commander Hardin's name while she was engaged in a classified mission in the Gulf of Aden, she stated. Here is her FitRep GPS-logged coordinates and black site orders confirming her location at the time. Another pin dropped. September 10, 2022 brokerage account in Delaware. But the commander was in the French Alps conducting joint NATO exercises with the GIGN. Supporting documents attached. Document after document. Scan after scan. Power of attorney form. Georgia driver's license. IP traces to K Street. Audio recording of Richard Hardin identifying himself as her legal agent. The room went silent, not with boredom, but with weight. The kind of stillness that follows when a web of lies collapses into hard truth. And through it all, I didn't look at him. Not once. I kept my eyes on the board, on the evidence, on the faces of the adjudicators as they began to realize this wasn't a daughter seeking revenge, it was a warrior demanding accountability. When Angela finally paused, she turned to me. "Commander, do you have anything to add?" I stood. My voice didn't waver. Only this. I swore an oath to serve with integrity, and I intend to honor that oath even when it means holding my own blood to account. Have you ever stood in a room where power thought it was untouchable and watched it flinch under the weight of truth? What would justice look like for you if you had the chance to confront it face to face? The air in the hearing room had shifted. Not a sound from the audience benches. Not even the rustle of paper. Just stillness, thick, weighty, the kind that wraps itself around your ribs and dares you to breathe. My father was still seated, though something had changed. His posture had relaxed into stillness, but not comfort. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring straight ahead, jaw-tight hands clenched just beneath the table line. His mask was cracking. Angela leaned forward, cool and deliberate. "We'd like to enter one final document into the record." She nodded to the screen. The monitor flickered, then displayed the setup paperwork for another secret investment account, one I hadn't seen before. This account, she said, was opened in the event of Lieutenant Commander Hardin's death during deployment. A retirement vehicle structured for emergency disbursement. She paused, letting the words hang like smoke. The sole beneficiary listed was not her mother, not her legal estate. It was Chloe Hardin. The room collectively exhaled as if everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it. The camera zoomed in on the beneficiary line. A. Hardin. Chloe. My sister. Angela's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The very daughter Mr. Hardin publicly called his blue chip stock was simultaneously listed as his financial fallback. This wasn't legacy planning. It was contingency laundering. I heard the chair scrape behind me. Chloe stood up slowly from the back row, her face pale as parchment. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a burning building, smoke still clinging to her skin. Her eyes locked on the screen, unmoving, unreadable. My mother clutched her wrist, whispering something through tight lips, but Chloe pulled away. And then she spoke. "You used me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It just cut through the silence like a piano string snapping. You said Lena was the one who abandoned the family. You said I was the future. But all this time I was just the backup plan. My father turned toward her, then slowly, as if it were taking effort just to lift his head. Chloe, he began, but she raised a hand. No, don't. You lied to her. You lied to me. You used her name like it was a tool, like it wasn't the most honorable thing in this family. She looked at me, and for once, I didn't see polished perfection. I saw a woman who had just realized she was standing on borrowed ground. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was high. I'm sorry, Lena, she said. I didn't know. I didn't want to know, but I see it now. My mother's face remained frozen expression, unreadable lips, tight with fear or fury, I couldn't tell which. And Richard Harden. He crumbled, not all at once, not loudly, but in the quiet unraveling of a man who realized he hadn't just lost a legal case, he'd lost the illusion of control. His hands dropped, his shoulders sagged. And in that moment, the room no longer belonged to him. Have you ever watched someone who thought they owned the room, realize the room was never theirs to begin with? When power shifted not through force, but through truth, what would you have said in that moment? The gavel didn't fall that day with dramatic thunder. There was no outburst, no shouting match, no security escort dragging anyone out. The truth didn't explode. It imploded quietly, methodically, pulling down every carefully constructed wall my father had spent decades building. His reputation, his credibility, his legacy. All of it collapsed under the weight of evidence and the one thing he had never prepared for exposure. The adjudicators recessed the hearing, citing formal review before issuing a ruling. But no one in the room needed a verdict to know what had just happened. We had already won. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with facts. I was packing my briefcase when he approached me in the corridor outside. His footsteps were slow, hesitant. The man who used to stride into boardrooms without looking left or right now looked like he wasn't sure his legs would carry him the next 10 steps. Lena, he said, voice gravelly unfamiliar. We can fix this. I can give it all back. Every cent. Every piece. We can settle. Quietly. Please. I turned to him. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown beyond the space he once held in my life. You can't give back 12 years, I said, voice even. You can't give back the nights I spent overseas wondering why I was never enough. You can't give back the silence you demanded from me in exchange for your approval. And you sure as hell can't give back my name. You already spent it. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. My mother stood at the far end of the hallway as still as a marble statue. Chloe beside her, not touching, not speaking, just watching, witnessing the collapse of the empire she once thought was her inheritance. You taught me everything was an investment, I continued. That loyalty only mattered if it produced a return. You treated love like leverage, family like branding, and you treated me, your daughter, as a liability to be managed. Well, here's your return, Dad. I leaned in just slightly enough for my words to cut beneath the calm. I'm cutting my losses. And I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The echo of my footsteps was louder than anything he could say. It was the sound of someone no longer owned, no longer afraid, no longer willing to sit quietly in the corner while power played its favorite game control. Outside, the air was sharp with autumn wind. I paused on the courthouse steps, closed my eyes, and let the chill hit my skin. It didn't burn. It cleared. A part of me felt hollow, but it wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space where guilt used to live. Space where silence once ruled. Have you ever walked away from someone who used love as currency and finally realized you didn't owe them a thing? What did that moment feel like for you? Did it sting? Or did it set you free? A week after the hearing, the federal indictment dropped like a steel hammer. The Department of Justice issued the statement mid-morning. Richard Harden, CEO of Harden Financial Group, indicted on charges of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The news spread faster than I expected. By noon, his company website had gone dark. By 3 p.m., federal marshals had frozen his assets. The empire he built on borrowed brilliance and stolen trust collapsed in real time. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pour a drink or punch the air or call Angela with congratulations. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and watched the headlines roll across the bottom of the television screen. Bloomberg, former K Street titan, faces federal charges. Wall Street Journal, Hardin indictment shakes defense finance sector. The same publications that once called him a generational mind now dissected his fall with clinical detachment. To them, it was a story. To me, it was history folding in on itself. The part that stung most wasn't the crimes, it was how predictable it all was. The partners who once toasted him vanished. Investors bailed. Lobbyists scrubbed his name from their bios. The silence that followed was not loyalty. It was survival. Just like the man himself taught them. When value drops, you cut the loss and run. My phone buzzed that evening. Chloe. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't bring up the court. She just said through a shaky voice and a mouthful of tears, I resigned today. She didn't need to explain. The guilt by association had already begun. Everyone looks at me like I knew, she whispered. Like I was part of it. Like I signed the papers myself. You didn't, I said softly. But ignorance isn't innocence. It's just a privilege. She sobbed on the other end. Raw, untrained sobs. Not the kind you hold back in public. The kind that only surface when the ground beneath you gives way. I didn't want it to be true, she said. I didn't want to believe he was capable of it. I know, I replied. Neither did I. That's how he got away with it for so long. The call ended without a goodbye. Just breathing. Just silence. I looked out the window at the lights of the city. DC had gone on spinning, indifferent as ever. It didn't care who rose or who fell. It only cared who moved next. But I wasn't thinking about legacy or redemption. Not anymore. I was thinking about peace. Not the kind that's handed to you after a battle, but the kind you build quietly, intentionally after the wreckage is cleared. Have you ever watched someone fall, not with vengeance, but with sorrow? Not because you wanted them destroyed, but because they gave you no other choice. What did you feel when the storm finally passed? 6 months later, I stood in the Hall of Heroes at the Pentagon Shoulders Square. Breath steady. The walls were lined with plaques bearing the names of men and women who'd given everything for a country that didn't always give back. The air inside wasn't reverent. It was weighty. A hush filled with more than silence. It was the echo of sacrifice, of names that were spoken only in moments like this. I wasn't wearing dress blues that day. At my request, I wore desert fatigues. The ones that still carried the grit of Djibouti and the dust of missions never documented. This moment wasn't for a commander behind a desk. It was for the woman who had crawled through sand with blood on her boots and orders in her hand. The woman who had bled in places no one back home would ever pronounce correctly. The one they'd tried to erase with paperwork. The Secretary of the Navy stood before me holding a small velvet box. His speech was short, respectful, but sanitized. The mission details remained classified. Only a few lines were spoken about courage under fire, leadership under pressure, a teammate pulled out under impossible odds. Then he opened the box and pinned the silver star over my heart. There was a click, then another. Camera shutters captured the moment, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the weight of that star. Small. Metallic. Heavier than it looked. Not because of the metal, but because of everything it had cost to earn it, and everything it had cost to keep it from being tarnished. I looked out into the rows of uniforms and suits. Dalton stood in the back, his arms crossed, a quiet nod exchanged between us. Angela was beside him in a black blazer with her usual no-nonsense face, though I could see the flicker of pride in her eyes. A few of my old teammates were there too, men who knew me not from headlines but from firefights and night jumps. None of them clapped. They just stood still. That was enough. They called me to the podium. I hadn't prepared anything. I hadn't planned to say much at all. But when I stood there in front of all that history, I let the words rise the way they always had through truth. I was taught that the highest honor is to serve without recognition, I said. That we go in, we complete the mission, and we leave no one behind. But I've learned something else these past months. Silence, while noble, can be dangerous. It can erase the truth. It can erase people. I let that sit. I didn't come here to be recognized. I came here because I refused to be erased. I stand here not as a daughter of a financier, but as Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin, United States Navy. And this, I tap the star, belongs to every soul who was told they were too complicated, too quiet, too different to matter. We matter. The applause didn't come fast. It came slow, measured, earned. Have you ever had a moment where the world finally saw you, not for the story others wrote, but for the one you fought to reclaim? What did it feel like when your name finally became your own again? That night, I skipped the formal reception. No cocktails, no polished handshakes, no polite lies passed between canapes. Instead, I made my way to a quiet bar tucked into a side street in Arlington. No one here cared about stars or scandals. The flag on the wall was sun-faded. The stools were uneven. The jukebox only played two genres: classic rock and silence. But it felt right, like home. Dalton was already there, nursing a beer. Angela arrived a few minutes later in jeans and a weathered leather jacket that made her look more like a biker than a federal attorney. Two of my old teammates slid into the booth beside me. No one brought up the courtroom. No one mentioned my father's name. We didn't need to. We told stories. The kind only warriors tell, half true, half ridiculous, all sacred. Stories of botched landings and lucky shots. Of silent nights broken only by breath and heartbeat. Of the kind of trust forged when you know the person beside you would take a bullet for you without blinking. At one point, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the velvet box. I opened it and set the silver star gently on the scratched wooden table. Not for display, just for presence. Next to it, someone laid down a faded photograph. Our team in the field, grinning like idiots, dust on our faces, sun in our eyes. The moment frozen before we all scattered back into duty. I looked at it for a long time. That was my legacy, not my last name. Not the trust fund I never touched. Not the seat at the Hardin family table I was never truly offered. It was this circle of people who had seen me at my worst and stood by me anyway. Angela lifted her glass. To silence broken. Dalton nodded. To names reclaimed. And I added, to the kind of family you don't inherit, but choose. We drank to that. Later, as I walked back to my apartment in the cool night air, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not victory, not pride, something quieter, lighter, peace. I had spent so long fighting for a place, a voice, a name, and now for the first time in years I felt no need to prove anything. I wasn't anyone's failed investment. I wasn't a cautionary tale in uniform. I was simply Lena, and that finally was enough. Have you ever reached the end of a long, painful road and realized the person you became along the way was the home you'd been searching for all along? What does peace look like for you when the noise finally fades? Some debts can't be measured in dollars, and some betrayals don't leave bruises, they leave echoes. If you're a parent listening to this and you've ever valued appearances over your child's truth, I ask you to reconsider. Because sometimes the child you dismissed becomes the one who walks through fire and comes back forged. Have you ever lived a story like mine, one where silence cost too much and truth saved your soul? If so, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Let's talk. And if this story meant something to you like it did to me, please like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming undeniable. Thank you for listening.